Hello everybody, I'm the Introverted Astrologer, and today I'm bringing you my third video in a series on current political leaders. Today we're looking at a surprising new entrant, someone who is moving up the rankings with pretty unprecedented speed, and his arrival coincides with a shift in our electorate, as many of us are now moving away from the old traditional two-party system. I am, of course, talking about Zack Polanski. He's gained political traction with immense speed, and although I don't have a birth time, I have recently completed a diploma in numerology, and so we'll be able to use his numbers to fill in some of the gaps. We have Zack's natal chart here. And unfortunately, there's no birth time, which is such a common issue in the UK. However, there's a great deal of striking characteristics in this chart, which I can explain to you without a birth time. For a start, so many of his planets are in fixed or cardinal signs. It's quite a striking pattern, and fixed signs explain qualities of being organised, being persistent. We can endure and stick in our heels. We can be a bit obstinate. Cardinal energy is leadership material. We have the desire to take the initiative. We seek to get things moving. We're very strategic and we're focused on goals. Another very striking thing about Zack's chart is how the planets are distributed around it. So we have a multiple of planets clustered in one part of the chart, and a solitary placement standing out on its own. And what we call this is a bucket-shaped chart. And these planets here form the bucket, and the moon here is the handle of the bucket. This handle becomes more pronounced because it serves as a focal point through which other planetary energies can be channeled. In Zack's case, this is compelling because his moon is in Taurus, and this is a place where we say the moon is exalted. It thrives in the stable, grounded, secure energy of Taurus. And these people can usually come over as quite placid and calm and emotionally centered. Now in Zack's case, Chiron is conjunct with that moon. Chiron is the part of the chart where we look for wounding, sensitivity, and the fact that it's conjunct with the moon is possibly pointing out some earlier wounding to do with issues of security, self-worth, but it also lends the potential to be highly emotionally sensitive, which could mean that Zack is able to emotionally resonate with people quite easily and to come over as somebody who is very attuned to issues of fairness, of security and stability. Let's have a quick look at the other planets on the opposite side of the chart. This Mars is said to be exalted in Capricorn because it is expressed in a very strategic, self-disciplined, goal-focused kind of way. Because it is so persistent, it can keep going and going in pursuit of its goals even when the rest of us have collapsed. Moreover, because this Mars leads the rest of the planets, it functions more strongly and acts as a kind of spearhead. It's moving faster than its usual speed, and it is also the ultimate dispositor of everything else in this chart. So we have an extremely powerful Mars. There is a note of caution. This Mars opposes the North Node of Destiny. In other words, it is on the South Node. The South Node describes skills, predispositions, tendencies that we may have brought forward from our previous lives in order to help us in this lifetime. What this does mean, again, is that this Mars is very amplified, but it can also mean that sometimes we over-rely on methods of achieving our goals that were useful or productive in previous lifetimes, but may not always be appropriate to a situation in our current lifetime. Because these are methods that have proved so successful before, we may tend to overuse them when a different approach would actually work better. In other words, we can become a little rigid and struggle to change course if something clearly isn't working. So that's just something for Zack to bear in mind, because we do have so much fixity in this chart that altering course would actually be probably quite difficult for him. His Sun and Venus in Scorpio are describing somebody with intensity, with depth and drive, somebody who has great self-discipline, and so Zack will be able to pursue what he wants with great tenacity and resilience. And I think we're steadily building up this picture of somebody who is oozing with determination, single-mindedness, tenacity, strong drive and a lot of energy. But what about Zack's mental powers? Well, his Mercury is in the sign of Libra, but it's very closely conjoined with Pluto and Saturn. Saturn is exalted in Libra, and so there is strength here because Saturn is bringing in strong self-discipline for Zack in the way he thinks about things and communicates with people. His ability to reason through things on a deeply psychological level and to communicate rationally in a very self-disciplined and strategic way. Well, all those skills are there in bucket loads. So the ability to think very deeply, to be adept in matters of diplomacy or political decisions, and also to hold his own in any arguments or debate. These qualities are all there, so this is all very promising. Can we see much that would knock Zack off his course between now and election? The good news is that he'll be impacted far less than most by transits from the planet Uranus, where we could see that Nigel Farage and Keir Starmer had some significant Uranus disruption between now and election. This is probably not going to be so marked for Zack. However, he does have a so-called midlife transit, which we all go through, and this is because Uranus is entering the territory of Gemini again this year, and as it does so, it will begin an opposition to its natal position. In itself, this won't be enough to knock Zack off course, in my opinion, but it could well introduce some tension or disruption this year. The purpose of Uranus is to bring through some change where we may have become too rigid or too settled, and so change arrives in one form or another to liberate us from old habits or life structures that are no longer useful. Ultimately, this can be very freeing, and Uranus can also bring insights and revelations so that we awaken to the truth of who we are. And I'll put some dates up on the screen so that you have a rough idea of when we can keep an eye open for some passing disruption. Now, can we see any other signs of potential disruption as we step ever closer to the next election? Well, by 2028, transiting Saturn will have moved into Taurus. And this is where some very strong structural testing could unfold for Zack. Saturn will be in Taurus and will also be forming a square with transiting Pluto. And this pair of planets will be placing some substantial pressure on Zack's own Sun and Venus in Scorpio. We could see that Zack's self-identity, his relationships, his loyalties, his attachments are all going to come under quite significant pressure. There could well be a power dynamic element caught up in this too. And it could be that Zack is very much occupied with powering through some intense opposition and tests of how realistic his structures, relationships and plans are. I think this will be a period of exceptionally hard work, a feeling of being tested and having to make some difficult decisions around resources, relationships, his value system. But Saturn is there for a reason, and when Saturn makes difficult contacts with our charts, it does feel like intensely hard work and difficult choices, but Saturn is actually allowing us to focus more narrowly on a particular area in our life where we need to cut away some of the dead wood. It helps us to be more realistic and get ourselves in decent shape for the future. We're likely to be pragmatic about a multitude of things, including relationships, self-worth, shared resources, and our dearly held values. Can Zack's numbers fill us in a bit more on his future path? There were some very striking things about Zack's numbers, and one of the pivotal numbers that we look at in numerology is the life path number, and in Zack's case this is A6. And so 6 is very orientated towards providing service to others. It takes on responsibilities and cares for people or movements around it. There's a danger of taking on too much in the way of responsibilities or duty, but by nature we're caring. The destiny number is also very important, and this is where it becomes interesting. Zack was actually born as David Paulden, and he changed his name when he was 18. This means that he has held his current name of Zack Polanski for longer than he had his birth name. The birth name remains a pivotal blueprint as such, but the name change resulted in a certain reorientation for Zack, which is interesting. His birth name had a destiny of 5, which is very pro-change. It seeks to enlarge on life's horizons and can even be a little restless. Now, when Zack changed his name, the destiny number became a 3, and this can be very important, particularly where people have a pronounced political image, because 3 is extremely creative and versatile. It thrives on social contact, on building up our network of friends and acquaintances. We are adept, articulate and fluent, and all of that dovetails very nicely with Zack's strength in using the media, in networking and forming strong connections with people around him, in using social media to escalate his cause. I was also very interested to see that he had a karmic number. There are only 4 karmic numbers, as I have been taught, and so we won't often come across them. And this karmic number does tie in rather well with what we can see in this grid here, where he has an arrow of frustration. Putting these two things together, this karmic number is said to arise when an individual may have had previous lifetimes where they didn't take up the opportunities that were made available to them, opportunities that could have been profoundly important. They potentially squandered chances which could have been useful. They may not have put in sufficient work to make the most of opportunities available. And so time and time again, they will find that they have to work very hard in this lifetime to address that karma. They could keep running into roadblocks, times when their progress is blocked, and they will have to keep getting themselves up yet again in order to come back and have another go. And that's interesting when you consider that the arrow of frustration is also describing the need to keep pushing forward despite coming up against delay or failure. I was actually very impressed with the life path period and pinnacles that Zack is in. You can see these at the bottom left part of the screen. And in numerology, these periods describe the timings in our life, what kind of experiences life is bringing us. And something that's quite unusual is that all of Zack's life periods have the number of 2. 2 is emphasising the need to act in collaboration with people around us, to form strong partnerships and alliances, and to thrive on cooperation, on joint working, with other people. His pinnacles were most illuminating though. When Zack was born, he was in a pinnacle of 4, which is a structured, hard-working kind of pinnacle. But as he got older, he moved into a pinnacle with a master number, which is 22-4. Because it's a master number, it would have been showing this lengthy period of preparation for Zack, in which he worked in a very stable, focused, structured way to bring some huge task or project forward, one which would have big societal importance. Master numbers often show when we have to drive through something which has a big societal impact, and it can be very hard work. But from the age of 40, Zack moved into a pinnacle of 8, and 8 is a very powerful number. There is huge drive and the potential for big achievements. This really is most fortuitous. There's a determination to achieve success, fulfill our goals, to power through with our ambitions and achieve something. Moreover, when Zack is 49, his final pinnacle in life starts, and this is again the master number of 22-4, emphasizing the ability to bring into being these large projects or tasks which are of benefit to humanity and which come with big levels of responsibility which we are able to take on. This can be tiring, but we are capable of very strong self-discipline in order to push through on something which leaves a lasting mark on the world. And so in wrapping up, my personal opinion is that we have that very strong natal potential and drive. This young man brings many skills to the table, and on balance there isn't that much that I can see knocking him off course. The numerology looks very promising, and provided that he can work with the reality checks coming in, particularly during 2028, his future looks very promising. So I hope this helped. Thank you for watching, and until the next one, do take care of yourselves, and God bless you all.